Hi everyone. In this lecture, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you can do if your company does not have usability testing. I'm actually going to take my glasses off for this now that I'm looking in the view. I think there's going to be quite a glare on it. So take those off, it'll go a little bit easier. So what I want to talk about is usability testing. I've worked at my position at my company for about 4 years, and for the first time, I'm actually doing usability testing while we're having this class. It's something that not a lot of companies have done in my experience in my career. We talked a little bit about Apple and also Microsoft creating these usability departments. For a local example, you could look at a company like Unisys. At one point, they had a lab that was devoted to usability testing, but as funding wasn't available, that's one of the first things to go, unfortunately. And I just want to talk about a couple of options that you may have if your company doesn't do usability testing. There are definitely still options of ways to test your content and evaluate it for translation and accessibility. So let's go through a couple of those. The first option is really just using your coworkers for a usability test. So this is still going to require time on your part, but you don't have to have as many official resources. If you can book a conference room, you can send out your own invites, you can make your own script, have someone else on your team serve as a note taker. Usually you won't have to offer the participants something for participating. Most people are happy to do it. But this is one way that you can get feedback. And while these won't be your real users, you can at least get some feedback on if steps are written in a clear way. If you're doing technical documentation, for example, maybe you documented a software app, you can see if that coworker is able to run through the steps for you and complete their task without going to outside help. You can also do things like have them log into the application, look at the help, and give you their first impressions if they've never seen it before, just because they work on the product, maybe developing it, maybe even selling it. It doesn't mean that they've looked at the help section for it necessarily. So definitely go out to other lines of business that you work with, sales, support, development, maybe like some of your BAs or your development managers, and you can definitely get a lot of feedback just from working with them. Another way is to send surveys. So that's something that we have done at my company. You can use free tools like SurveyMonkey. Some companies are going to have their own. Obviously, I know Poll Daddy is another one that I've heard being used. Those have really simple UIs to use. If you don't have a lot of experience making surveys, you can still produce quite an effective survey, and they will summarize results for you. Of course, they're going to try to sell you the add-on features. That would obviously be up to you. You can also just compile your own feedback, but it's definitely worth investing in a survey, working through, making questions, make sure that you're not leading anyone. For example, you might be tempted to say something like, how how much did you like the product, or what did you like about this feature? But maybe the participant didn't actually like the feature and you're not giving them a chance to say that. So you might do something like, how satisfied were you with the feature? And then you'd have a scale starting from very dissatisfied, slightly dissatisfied, a neutral setting, slightly satisfied, and then very satisfied. So definitely don't discount surveys. You can still get a lot of good information from them. Another thing you can do is, if you're working particularly in a software application that is web-based, you can change the locale on your browser. I should say this is for products that are translated. And you change the locale on your browser. Usually it's just ampersand symbol, locale equals, and you use a language code. For example, English is EN, so maybe you wanted to see it in Spanish. You can use ES. And if your product is translated, then you can go in, look at the product in the translated version. You can also find a lot of errors that way. Even if you don't speak Spanish, you might recognize that, oh, a word wasn't translated. Sometimes newer words, or especially not newer words, but something that's more IT based or definitely an American word may not translate to another culture. It may just be left in the English version, and that's not always the best decision. So you could have a word like dashboards. That's one that my company has had problems with in translating. They don't always know what that means, the translators that is. Um, and a lot of times it ends up not being translated. So we end up with a word suddenly in English when maybe the rest was in Russian. So I definitely advise people to go and look at your content in a translated language if you are translating. If you have someone that speaks a language in your department, that's even better. But if you do not have that, still look at it in the other language. You can detect a lot of errors, probably more than you would expect, without being able to read the language. Next, we want to talk about testing accessibility. Now, this is another thing that's going to vary by industry, and by accessibility, I think I mentioned it in maybe week 1 or 2, that accessibility especially comes into play when you are talking about companies that want to sell to government agencies. Government agencies need to buy products that are accessible, unless there's a reasonable workaround. So you can test the accessibility of your product, of your documentation, without putting apart a lot of effort. And this is actually a lot of manual testing. And by not putting out a lot of effort, I don't mean that it doesn't take a lot of time. It is a time investment, but you can do it without having to buy new tools. You don't have to hire someone to come in. Of course, you can do all that and it would make the product better, but you can definitely do this without having to reach out to people outside of your group. It might be something like going through a tab order. And what I mean by that is downloading a screen reader, and then you're going to tab through help content and see what the screen reader is reading to someone who might be visually impaired. If you're doing something like evaluating color contrast, you're probably going to need a tool for that. There are some free ones available. I'm not sure about their effectiveness, but I can also put those into discussion for this week if you're interested in checking some of those out. For my company, they developed a toolbar that we use uh, in all of our offices, so we're all on the same page with accessibility. But it's definitely something that you can test certain aspects without having to do that. And then last, I have working with support on customer complaints. Now, support has probably viewed the help documentation to some degree. They get a call from a customer that something's not working in the application, and they reach out to support. Support then goes to the documentation, or they might be going to something like a white paper and looking for help on that topic. This is particularly common with administrative errors, especially system admin. And what we can gain from customer support is what common problems that they're having. Maybe there's a common error message that keeps popping up in the UI, and that's user interface in the UI, and the same customers are having the same problem. So we need to evaluate whether or not that message is even effective. Clearly, if they have to reach out to support, there's something about the message that isn't working, whether it's maybe just an unknown error that can come up when developers forget to put in the actual message. We've had that case before. Another situation could be that there's steps provided, but the steps are outdated, or maybe the person doesn't have the right privileges to complete the steps. So it's something that sometimes we need to take a step back and say, okay, we need to rework this message. Maybe that user can't fix the problem, but they should reach out to their application administrator at their company prior to reaching out to support. And again, that's something that's going to help support as well. As much as you can prevent a customer from calling support, you're going to save them their time and then also thereby their money. So those are just a few ideas on ways that you can test some usability without doing official usability testing. I hope that was helpful. I really did this section more so for those of you who are already communication professionals, are thinking about this as a career. There are different options that you should be prepared to discuss with potential employers, because not all companies are going to have the funding for a usability lab or a testing environment. It's great if you find a company that does. I I think it's wonderful, and I really recommend you do usability testing if you get an opportunity to. But if you don't, there's a couple other ways you can still improve your documentation and kind of get a sanity check for it to see that it's operating at a normal level. It's serving its purpose. Maybe there could be a few more enhancements. You might find that through survey feedback or talking to support. So these are the ways that you can still enhance your documentation if you can't do the usability testing. All right, that's it for this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment to me on the discussion board or just send me an email. Thanks, guys.